Welcome into the Wiltfong Whiparound with Steve Wiltfong. I am your host, Josh Newberg, and today's Monday, December 9th. I hope we are all well recovered from our National Signing Day hangover. Ready for some portal action. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's show. We're also going to go behind the scenes of Texas's #1 recruiting class. Plus, 2026 class is here and they are ready to go. So we got Steve Wiltfong, the #1 insider in the entire country on the show. You guys sit back for 20, 30 minutes, get caught up on all things recruiting. But before we do, hit that subscribe button. We had a great time covering the 2025 cycle. Not done just yet, but 2026 is going to be a blast as well. So jump on board and hit subscribe. All right, let's bring in the great Steve Wiltfong. Steve, we got to talk this Texas #1 class. It came with a flip, a shocker, some key holds, but let's start with the flip. It happened the night before signing day. LSU cornerback Caden Phillips flips his commitment. It was going back and forth. We thought he was going to stick, but in the end, he's a Texas Longhorn. How'd they do it?
Yeah, the morning before, Josh, and it was a lot of back and forth with LSU, Texas. Will he stick? Will he visit? Can the Longhorns get it done? There were some times where it looked like he was going to stay locked in with LSU, but Texas was relentless. The #4 cornerback in the country, an on-3 5-star recruit. Cade Phillips was one of the most coveted players down the stretch for Steve Sarkisian and his staff. And I talked to a source around Austin on Sunday that said, I think we're going to finish with the #1 recruiting class in the country. And they did just that. And it was the Cade Phillips momentum that kind of took them into Wednesday, which then ended on Friday with the commitment of Justice Terry. But one of the most tradesy cornerbacks in the country going to Texas to keep this defense playing championship caliber for years to come.
All right, and then there was the big one that went down on signing day. It really locked it up for the Horns in that #1 spot. Justice Terry, 5-star plus defensive lineman, picks Texas over Georgia amongst others. But Georgia was really the team that we were watching with Justice Terry. What do you think it was in the end with Texas to land him?
Well, I think that infrastructure and resources have a lot to do with some of these recruitments coming down the stretch, and I think Texas is obviously very competitive in that arena. He took his official visit to Austin for Texas's home game against Georgia, so he got a chance to take in that atmosphere and environment, see how important football is around Austin. Continue to have dialogue with this Texas coaching staff, certainly sees a program right there in the hunt. Again, on Sunday, leading into the early signing period, I wrote that Texas did indeed have a shot at the #1 class, and there was confidence around Austin that they could win out for Justice Terry and that it was coming down to Texas or Georgia. Now, there was a lot of confidence around Auburn as well, being one of the final 3 schools for Justice Terry, but in the end, he chose Texas. I think the nerves really started to pick up around Athens the night before, that they could ultimately lose Justice Terry, and they obviously did. He was the one that clinched the #1 recruiting class for Texas at the end of the cycle. And in between Cade Phillips and Justice Terry, Texas landed a commitment from Michael Terry, Josh, the #1 athlete in the country. They beat Nebraska for him. They were the longtime leader for Michael Terry. The opportunity to come in and play in a variety of roles in Texas's offense excites him. The relationship with Coach Sarkisian, Coach A.J. Milwee, Tashard Choice, being down the road from family, that locked it up for Michael Terry. They had the big flip of Cade Phillips, and then obviously added Justice Terry to clinch the #1 class.
And there were some big holds because without keeping Josiah Sharman, Myron Charles, Jamie French in the fold, they might not finish #1. How tough was it? I mean, Texas obviously did it, but I mean, they were coming after their commits down to the wire.
Well, that last day before the dead period, Josiah Sharma took a visit to USC. So the last campus, the last coaches he saw face-to-face were Trojans coaches. But Texas stood strong in the paint, hung in there, and kept one of their most coveted targets committed. If you remember, Josiah committed to Oregon. Texas flipped him from the Ducks. Alabama was also a major contender. So that was just a blue chip battle royal throughout the process. And Texas won that battle a couple times. The same goes with Jamie French, the receiver from Florida, took a visit, an official visit to Florida right after the vote of confidence for Billy Napier. His high school quarterback, Tremel Jamel Jones flips from Florida State to Florida. There was some excitement about potentially playing with DJ Lagway in Gainesville, but Texas hangs on. You talk about the excitement of potentially playing with DJ Lagway. Texas just counters, well, why don't you come play with Arch Manning? And so obviously Jamie French is going to come play with Arch Manning for a program. They beat Ohio State. They beat LSU. They beat Miami for Jamie French the first time. They beat Florida for him down the stretch. Some really huge holds, some really big recruiting wins. This class is highlighted by what they've done at the point of attack and defense across the board. Nobody recruited a better defensive class than Texas this cycle, and folks in Austin should be excited about the future of guys that are coming in this 2025 haul.
What a winding, twisting road that the Longhorns had to take to get there, but they finished with the number one class in America, 2 top 50 commitments on National Signing Day. They hold on to all their big dogs, and that is the recipe for finishing at the top. Texas fans, talk to us. How you guys feeling about this class? Let us know. Comment section below. All right, Steve, let's talk about a couple prospects that remain unsigned. Now, there's 2 big ones that we're going to talk about in this update. Offensive tackle Ty Haywood and quarterback Bryce Baker. Let's start with and both of them are committed, by the way. So neither of them signed during the early period. The next time they can sign will be in February. What's the latest on offensive tackle Ty Haywood, Alabama commitment?
Yeah, it's more likely that he does not end up at Alabama. And there's 2 schools I have a keen eye on right now. Obviously, the Michigan Wolverines. There's been a lot of buzz that Michigan's been around this recruitment for the past month. And they aim to get him on campus, get him around the coaching staff in person. But he's really connected with Sharon Moore. And then you have Texas Tech, Joey McGuire, and the Red Raiders. They've done a phenomenal job of recruiting the state since they've come to Lubbock. And they're right there as a dark horse for Ty Haywood down the stretch.
All right, let's talk about the top available quarterback right now. Bryce Baker, committed to UNC, declined to sign. I think we all know why, because UNC does not have a coach. But what's going on with his recruitment right now?
Well, the top 100 overall prospect was at Penn State for the Nittany Lions win over Maryland to end the regular season. Had a fantastic visit with Penn State's coaching staff. They think Coach Franklin's a legend. They love what they heard from offensive coordinator Coach Kotelnicki, and they think that Coach Danny O'Brien is one of the top quarterback coaches in the country and have really formed a nice relationship with him. Penn State's been recruiting Bryce all fall. So there is a connection and some familiarity with the Penn State coaching staff. LSU's a program that has really come on here at the end of the cycle for him. I would not be surprised if he ultimately visited Baton Rouge. Joe Sloan leading the charge. He's done some Zooms with LSU where they've really been intrigued by the way LSU develops their quarterbacks, from Jaden Daniels to Nussmeier this year, and what they've seen from him, the flashes of brilliance they've seen from Nussmeier this year. Just the technology and facilities around LSU are also attractive. But he's waiting to see who gets hired at North Carolina. He's been committed there for 2 years now. Excited to see who takes over that corner office in Chapel Hill, and then immediately building a relationship with whoever that new head coach is and finding out who the OC is, wondering or learning how he fits into their plans, how quickly they see him on the field. Relationships are going to be king at the end of this process for Bryce and his family, and they're connecting with LSU. They've been connected with Penn State, and we'll see what happens with this new hire at North Carolina.
Yeah, so we'll see. Now, they can't take any visits in December, but they can hit the road again in January and then likely make a decision in early February with the late signing period. So you guys get in here and talk to us. What do you think about Ty Haywood, Bryce Baker? I know we're hearing some teams involved now, but I got to imagine these recruitments are going to blow up in January. So talk to us. Where do you think these guys end up? All right, Steve, let's talk transfer portal, because today's Monday and the portal is open. Players are jumping in. Teams are getting their recruitments lined up, and we're going to see some visits already this week heading into the weekend. Why don't we start at the quarterback position? Let's bring in Steve Wiltfong, and we got a couple big ones on the board. Miller Moss, Caden Salter, Jackson Arnold, Jacob Zeno. So let's start with Miller Moss. He is departing USC. What's the latest on him?
Well, I think you have two early front runners for him, right? You have Missouri and you have the Louisville Cardinals. But we'll see if some other programs emerge. I could see Michigan really taking a swing at Miller Moss as well, but Missouri and Louisville are off to the races to start that process.
Now, you broke some news on Caden Salter on Sunday evening, Monday morning. Caden Salter already setting up some visits, the quarterback leaving Liberty. Where's he going first? Who's he going to check out?
Well, Syracuse has a visit locked in for Friday for Caden Salter. I think that is an intriguing program to keep an eye on, the way Kyle McCord stepped in there and had a big season for Fran Brown in this first-year coaching staff, the excitement around the Orange program, the great season they had ending with the win over Miami. Caden Salter would certainly be a plug-and-play guy for them, an opportunity for him to keep it going and maybe even take it another step forward. So keeping a close eye on Syracuse for Caden Salter right now as more programs emerge.
All right. Now, let's talk a little predictions. You dropped one in for Jacob Zeno. Pete Nakos, just while we're taping, put in a prediction for Jackson Arnold, who's leaving Oklahoma to land at Mississippi State. So we'll see how that works out. But where are you predicting Jacob Zeno?
Well, we like Jacob Zeno to ultimately end up at Texas A&M. He's visiting the Aggies on Monday today, 6'4", 210 pounds, threw for nearly 5,000 yards during his time at UAB, where he leaves as the program's all-time leading completion rate guy. Texas A&M, they got a really talented young quarterback room led by starter Marcel Reed. They got Miles O'Neill, a true freshman, and then they're bringing in Brady Hart, obviously in this top 10 2025 recruiting class. But they want to bring in a veteran, a guy that can provide some leadership, help these younger guys develop, and push the room from a competitive standpoint. And I think that they lead for Jacob Zeno coming into today's visit. And one more on 3 RPM that went in today, Josh, from Pete Nakos and I, is for former Stanford quarterback Ashton Daniels to land at Auburn. Now, the Tigers could be looking for 2 quarterbacks in the transfer portal this cycle. Obviously signed 5-star quarterback Deuce Knight as one of the jewels of their 2025 recruiting class that finished in the top 10. But Ashton Daniels, he's from the Peach State. He led Buford High to 3 state titles. He tells me he's going to be in Georgia next week, or Georgia tomorrow. He's going to quickly set up a visit to the Plains. They're the leader. He's talking to Iowa and a couple other programs, but Auburn is the heavy trend for Ashton Daniels, and the on 3 RPM reflects that.
All right, you guys, the portal is open. How we feeling? Talk to us. What does your team need? Who do you think is the top guy in the portal this cycle? Let us know. Comment section below. The class of 2026 is not waiting for the 2025 cycle to come to an official end. This weekend, the number 1 overall player, on 3's number 1 overall player, Edge Zion Ely, came off the board. Steve, is this a bit of a shocker? I mean, he committed to Maryland.
Well, obviously, Oregon was the program he had named his leader and had some momentum coming off a couple trips to Eugene, one at the end of summer for Saturday Night Live, and then returning for a game visit earlier this fall. But he did make it to Maryland after that for a game, has the long-standing relationships with Coach Loxley and his staff. And he told me on Saturday before going public with his commitment that he just took a step back and thought about what he really wanted for his recruitment and staying home, helping build that program up, those relationships, the opportunity to make a big impact on the field. Excited him enough to jump in for Maryland. Now the Terrapins will be playing defense the rest of this 2026 cycle as these other programs, the Oregons, the Tennessees, the Floridas, the Penn States, they won't go away. The Miamis, they all hosted them for games this fall. They'll continue to recruit Zion Ely, but just a huge win for Mike Loxley and company. They have a top 15 class now early in the 2026 cycle. None bigger than Zion Ely, the number 1 ranked recruit in the country, an electric high upside pass rusher who is committed to Maryland.
Mike Loxley doing what he does in the DMV. All right, let's talk a little bit about Oregon. In 2025, right now, currently, they have the number 2 class in America, but in 2026, they have the number 1 class. So they are stacking elite talent. How have they jumped ahead so far in 2026?
Well, they've done a good job of just getting these guys on campus multiple times, getting them there for the big recruiting weekends in the spring or summer, getting them on campus for the games with the best environment. But we talked about this on our early signing period show. Dan Lanning and his staff, yes, they have a lot of support behind their football program from an infrastructure and resources standpoint. But from a relationship standpoint, they're second to none. I mean, Dan Lanning's heavily involved in recruiting their top targets. Their assistant coaches do a good job of fostering relationships, and they have an off-field recruiting staff that is very important to the process of them building great relationships and earning the trust of these top players across the country. So, and then it certainly doesn't hurt that they're undefeated. They're number one going into the college football playoff. The NFL draft's been good to them since Dan Lanning and company have been there. So the track record of player development, the history of their resumes in general, Oregon's leaving no stone unturned as they try and recruit the best players in the country, cycle in and cycle out.
All right. So number one offensive tackle, Jackson Cantwell. He's not in decision-making mode yet, but the way he's taking visits makes me think that we could be looking at a spring decision. Now, I know he hasn't gone on record saying any of that, but it seems like his recruitment's heating up, and you broke some news today that number one offensive tackle, Jackson Cantwell, has 2 trips lined up. What does it mean for his recruitment? And right now, who are you giving the edge to?
Well, he'll be at Michigan and Ohio State this weekend. That'll be his first look at each of those campuses. And he told me this is his last first look at schools before he really starts to dive in on his favorites and start narrowing it down. So Ohio State and Michigan looking to make a move on the likes of Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Missouri, and Nebraska. Miami got a visit this fall. They're in there. And then Oregon and USC's been to in the past. See, there's been times where I've really liked Georgia's position for Jackson Cantwell, but when you look at how Zion Ely's recruitment played out, and he's committed to Maryland, Bryce Underwood flipping to Michigan at the end of the cycle, these in-state programs can be real formidable when they get the backing and support from their NIL resources and infrastructure standpoint. And we've seen Missouri win some major recruitments like Luther Burden, keeping him at home under Coach Drinkwitz and company. And his dad's in the track Hall of Fame at Missouri, had a tremendous career before going on to the Olympics. I think when it boils down to decision time, Missouri's going to do all they can to keep Jackson Cantwell in state. But look, he's interested in about 10 schools right now. He's going to visit Michigan and Ohio State this weekend. There's a lot of things he's looking at that's going to be important for him in making his college decision. I think he'll take some visits in the spring, take some official visits in the summer, and then nail it down to one. And the Big Ten powerhouses, Michigan and Ohio State, it's their turn to show Cantwell and his family what they got this weekend.
All right, Steve, when it comes to the 2026 cycle, talk to the fans here. Recruiting calendar. What does it look like in terms of when the action happens? When can we expect commitments? Where are the visits? Take us down the path for 2026 recruiting.
Well, they're going to just start trickling in, Josh. We're going to have some big Junior Day weekends coming up, and Junior Days aren't what they used to be. They're now 15, 20 of your top guys. Break them up by position and really show them the love, get them around each other, thinking about a potential future playing together at that campus that they're on. And then obviously you're going to have the official visits. Some will be taken in April, but the majority of them will come in June. And then the end of June and July, we're going to have a ton of commitments, and then we're going to see if they hold, because you can't have decommit season. You can't have flip spatula season without commit season first. So we're starting to dial up for commit season again. And then, as you know, the stories stay the same, the names change, and the 2026 class is on deck. It's going to be another exciting year on the trail.
It is, man. And just last year we were gearing up for these all-star games. That's when Bryce Underwood made his commitment. He committed to LSU on January 6th. There's a bunch of guys that came off the board within 2 or 3 days around him, and then the quarterbacks went on a run for about the next 6 weeks after Bryce Underwood came off the board. So yeah, we are hitting the high time for 2026 commitments, recruiting. It's going to be exciting. You guys talk to us. What do you think about this 2026 cycle? Oregon on top right now. Who do you think finishes number one in the end? Call your shot now.